So, after several years of gardening myself and speaking to so many professional gardeners, I have learned that a thriving organic vegetable garden does not start the day you plant it, it starts the day you plant it. So, today I have the perfect guest to talk all about planning your garden this year. So, 2025 is your best gardening season yet. Welcome to the Growing Joy with Plants podcast, where we not only learn how to care for plants successfully, but how to simply and affordably use our plant babies to cultivate more joy in our lives by doing so. I'm Maria, former plant killer turned happy plant lady, author of Growing Joy, the Plant Lover's Guide to Cultivating Happiness, speaker, podcaster, and most importantly, your new best plant friend. On Growing Joy with Plants, you'll find conversations about houseplant care, gardening tutorials, and wellness through the lens of plants. Plant care is self-care on Growing Joy. Hello, plant friend. Welcome back to Growing Joy with Plants. I'm Maria, your host. I'm here to help you care for plants and grow joy. If you're new here, welcome. If you are a returning listener, welcome back. I'm so honored to help you grow joy in your gardens and with your houseplants. And today we're tackling one of the biggest factors that separate struggling gardens from thriving gardens, and that's strategic garden planning. And it's helpful because at this point, as we're waiting for our last frost date to arrive, we're getting a little itchy, right? So planning is a really great way to kind of keep our minds busy before we can actually get out to our gardens and start planting. And so today I have Joe Lample, the founder of Joe Gardener and creator of many digital gardening courses that I've taken, including organic vegetable gardening. And Joe joins us to break down his key tips for planning before you plant when it comes to your garden this year. We're really focusing on two different things in this conversation, which is planning your plants, planning their biodiversity, and then also planning how to have the healthiest soil. And he shares so many insights, and make sure you stay till the end because he has a special launch offer for his organic vegetable gardening course, which I'm a graduate of, in case you are interested. All right. If you're tired of battling weak plants, constant pests, and disappointing harvests, this episode is to help you plan to never deal with them again. Let's get into it. The outdoor to my indoor. Welcome back, Joe.
I think that's a first. I love that. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. And it's good to talk to you, old friend. We haven't reconnected like this in a while, so we're overdue. And I'm glad we're having a chance to do that today.
Yes, well overdue. Probably since, the last time you were on the show, which was once again to talk about gardening, because 'tis the season, 'tis the planning season for most of us. Not for me. I'm in the midst of my growing season here down in Florida. But I remember from my old days in Zone 5, 'tis the planning season. How are you feeling about your garden this year?
Well, my garden, my raised bed garden, it looks really great for a good part of the year. It's an embarrassing hot mess right now because it's all the leftover stuff that lived through the fall and then died off in the very cold weather we had earlier this year. And because it's seed starting season, my shadow has not visited my garden much this year. So it doesn't look good, to answer your question. But cleanup time is coming very soon. But right now it's focused on the seed starting. And you're right about, here we are again talking gardening. And it's a good thing we're talking gardening because if you did a podcast with me to talk about something else, I'd feel sorry for you. What else do I know how to talk about?
Lots of amazing things. But yes, you're my go-to garden guy, as I've taken your gardening classes multiple times, my garden friend and my garden mentor. So, end of March, most of us are looking towards our spring and summer. Hopefully, so we've already started seeds already. What do we need to be thinking about when it comes to making 2025 our best gardening season yet?
You said the key word there, and that is thinking about. So prior to actually being involved in the action of sowing the seeds and putting the plants in your garden, you need to be thinking about, first of all, what is it that I really want to grow? Where am I going to get it? Any criteria that may be special to you or important to you? Maybe it's certified organic seed or regionally sourced or regionally adapted. Things that we just tend to wing if we haven't planned ahead. And that's the theme of this part of what I am getting at, is making sure that in the calm before the storm, we're using the calm time to really effectively think through try to get that crystal ball out and think about what we want our garden to be and try to envision that and then work backwards from that. As we often do with gardening timelines, we start with the end. We begin with the end in mind and we work backwards to figure out when we need to be starting stuff. But even before, like with the seed example that you just said, maybe if somebody makes that the starting point, but really that's not the starting point. That's pretty far down the line. The real starting point is before that, and is what I really want to grow. How much of that do I want to grow, and how do I want to source it? Do I have the equipment that I need? Do I have enough trays? Do I have the right soil? Do I have my grow lights? There's a lot there. And what happens is you start scrolling and you see that everybody else is sowing their seeds. And the first thing you need to remember is a lot of those people are in the southern part of the U.S. And you in Florida, if you were posting pictures like that and somebody in Michigan saw you doing that, they might think, oh my gosh, I need to do that. Well, no, that's what zone information is for. And we have to be realistic about the timelines. But with the planning ahead of time, we are able to make those determinations so we can kind of map things out. And let's face it, a lot of us are not inherently planners. We just like to plant. We just like to do it, and we kind of just, basically it's the fire, aim, ready strategy rather than the ready, aim, fire strategy. And I prefer the ready, aim, fire strategy. So if we apply that to gardening, when the season becomes a thing, when we hit that date and the frost is behind us and we don't have that risk anymore, let me just tell you, Mother Nature and spring, they are on like this fast track race and they're not going to wait for you to catch up. They're moving on. And if you're not ready to go when they are, you're going to feel like this freight train is coming down the tracks at you at a very fast pace and you can't stop it. And it's going to leave you behind if you're not ready. So the planning is your best strategy you can do in the calm before the storm.
Yeah, I mean, that resonates so deeply with me on a personal level right now because I experienced missing the train completely this year. I moved to Florida in August and October is planting season in Florida. So
Yep.
it's so reverse.
Mm-hmm.
But in September and October, I was like finding a dining room table. I was not thinking about my garden. So I completely missed any seed starting. And then even in October, I still wasn't quite there yet. I was overwhelmed with other stuff. I missed seedling purchasing. Like I missed the whole garden season here. And so now I'm just like throwing stuff in some containers and seeing if it sprouts and seeing if it'll melt come, May and June. But I can really be a testament to that. Like you really do have to plan because then your window for planting is pretty narrow if you want the proper yields that you're supposed to get.
And you can't turn the clock back either. So you need to know when it's coming.
Yeah. Like I was like, I don't know, should I go to Home Depot and just buy one of those like huge tomato plants and replant it and see if I could maybe do it that way? And then I was like, no, Maria, just take the hit and get over it. So with that in mind, how many months before your last frost date should someone be thinking and planning?
I think a really good rule of thumb is 2 months.
2
And
months. Okay.
if we said tomatoes, since we've already started with tomatoes, that really is the perfect timeline because when you sow the seed into wherever you're putting it to start it, about 4 weeks after that, because they germinate within the first few days. So about 4 weeks after you've sown the seed, it's gotten big enough that it's outgrown that space that you probably put it into generally, the standard seed cell packs and stuff. And they need more room. The roots are getting crowded and constricted, and the top growth needs more opportunity along with the roots. So you pot it up at the 4-week mark, roughly. And then in another 4 weeks, that potted up plant is now of size that's really perfect for transplanting out into the garden. So 4 and 4 is a really good formula. And that applies to most of the summer crops, peppers, and just all of that stuff. So 4 and 4.
You were also talking about like planning like seed selection, like planning what you want to plant, where you want to plant it, the seed selection. I think also planning what you want to start from seed versus what you want to buy seedlings of. Because I feel like that's a big part of gardening year over year with your seasons too, is deciding like what is worth it for you to start seeds and then what might just be easier for you to buy plugs of, at the garden center when it's time.
And another thing in that equation is, do I start seeds indoors 8 weeks before the frost date? So I have that head start and they're ready to go outside. So that would have me starting them indoors. Or do I want to direct sow those seeds into the garden rather than buy the plugs? And that would be later into the season, closer to that frost-free date. So that's another option where you're still sowing the seed, but you're not doing it indoors. So you skip all that part. Or do you buy the seedlings? And a lot of times, Maria, I find that people that start learning how to start from seed, become so infatuated and enamored with it, and they really are proud of themselves for the success that they're gaining from that process, that they want to change up and do more varieties and try different things and add to their portfolio of skills
Mhm.
of what they start from seed. So rather than, it's almost as though, and I don't mean to make this sound a negative in any way, but it's almost as though once you learn how to start seeds, you kind of don't want to go buy them at the garden center already grown. Now, that said, every year I find myself occasionally going to the garden center because I either didn't plan enough or I ran out of time or something. There's some reason that necessitates the convenience and the thankfulness that there's that plant ready for me to take off the rack and pop it in my garden. So for
Mhm.
me, it's more of a convenience thing, but there's no shame in that at all because not everybody's into seed starting. But I love the fact that at least they're buying their plants and getting them into the garden and then they take it from there.
And I have to give a shout out to your course, Master Seed Starting, which I have taken multiple times. It's if you want to start seeds, you must take this course. It's everything you need to know. But I think having the control over the seeds, like
Mhm.
knowing that it's in organic soil, knowing
Yeah.
how it's grown, watching the seeds sprout. But yeah, like the variety, I'm a crazy micro dwarf tomato girl. Ever since I interviewed Craig LaHoulier like 100 years ago for my podcast, and he sent me a little envelope of microdwarf tomato seeds. And ever since, I've grown so many different varieties,
Yeah.
but you can't find those varieties in your
No,
local
that's
big
true.
box stores.
Great point.
You can't find one of the favorite plants, my favorite plants I've ever grown was a pineapple husk cherry. I've never found that in a garden center, like the only reason why I can grow that. What's your favorite, like random variety that you've never been able to find? Pre-grown. Sorry. So you can find the seed, but not pre-grown.
Actually, it's just funny you said that. There's a heirloom, indeterminate, full-size beefsteak size tomato called pineapple.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it doesn't taste like pineapple, but the color of the skin is yellow and orange and pink and red, and it's
Mhm.
just beautiful. And if you did a blind taste test, you would never know what color the skin was. You would just think that is an incredible tasting tomato. But I've never seen that one on the rack at Lowe's or Home Depot or a garden center. And a lot of others too. And like in my seed sale every year that I do, I grow about 45 varieties of tomatoes
Wow.
to offer, seedlings. And so you're not going to find 45 varieties of heirloom organically grown tomatoes at any box store or any garden center. And it's fun to experiment too. If you relied only on what was available because the retailer decided that's what they were going to sell you this year,
Mhm.
what is that? That doesn't give you an opportunity to really explore because that's just the same old 10 varieties. They try to keep it simple and that is it. But a lot of times those are the hybrids, which nothing wrong with hybrids because those have been bred because they have some benefit to why they were created. But you miss out on these really classic heirloom varieties that are the old ones that have been passed down through the generations that just taste better than anything off of the rack. And
Have you tried the purple tomato yet?
oh no, I haven't. I've seen it. The real dark, almost black colored skin. Have you?
Yeah. So I was just at the Northwest Flower and Garden Show,
Yeah, yeah.
and that tomato is distributed by Little Prince Plants. And I know the guy. So he had a bunch of the purple tomatoes and he let me do a taste test.
Ah,
Joe, it's insane. It's so purple. It's like it will stain your fingers with purple, like blueberry juice. It looks like a blueberry, but it tastes just like a tomato. It's crazy. So I missed my tomato growing, but you didn't. So, well, no, you've already started your tomatoes. But anyway, to anyone listening who still has time to start tomato seeds, I highly recommend. And it apparently has all the anthocyanins, like it has all the good stuff from the blueberry. It was really fascinating. It was so fun. That's why I love going to those shows because you always learn something new.
those are great. And Northwest Flower and Garden Show does it as good or better than anybody with their education focus and the vendors they attract and the speakers that come and the books they offer. Love that show so much.
Yeah, so good. So we're looking at 4 and 4. We're looking at planning. In your opinion, what are the most important aspects of the planning phase of gardening before your frost date rolls around? Did you know that some of the most delicious and medicinal mushrooms aren't found in grocery stores, but they're actually found growing wild, sometimes right in your backyard? In the new book, Go Forth and Forage, expert forager and Appalachian native Whitney Johnson takes you on a season by season journey through 50 North American wild mushrooms, from spring morels to fall lion's mane and beyond. With stunning photos, clear identification tips, and expert guidance on safe harvesting, this book is your go-to field guide for finding, preparing, and even making medicinal tinctures with your foraged finds. I mean, how many times have you been walking around your local forest or maybe in your backyard and you see a mushroom and you wish that you knew what it was, right? So whether you're a curious beginner or a seasoned forager, this book is going to help you build confidence in the woods and in the kitchen. Ready to unlock the hidden world of wild mushrooms? Grab yourself a copy of Go Forth and Forage by Whitney Johnson anywhere books are sold. Amazon, bookshop.org, or your local bookstore. That's Go Forth and Forage by Whitney Johnson.
I think, when it's the dead of winter and we have cabin fever and we're thinking about gardening, it is hard not to be overly ambitious. I mean, we want to hit the ground running when it's time, and we are, all guns a-blazing. And that's part of the problem, because if we're not writing down and mapping out and really stepping back and thinking through that, and I'm guilty of this too. I aspire to be more of a planner than I truly am, although I have the spreadsheets and I try. But Maria, when I'm in the thick of it, I'm adding this variety and this variety. And next thing you know, I'm totally off track. And then what happens is I end up with thousands of seedlings and probably more than I'll ever sell. And I'd hate to see the leftovers go into the compost bin, but sometimes that's what happens. But to answer your question, what do we need to be thinking about ahead of time? It's how many plants are realistic for what I want to grow? What do I want to grow of the edibles or the ornamentals or the native plants in the space that I have? What space is that? And then not go overboard. I mean, it's not a big crime if you do, and there's not a really bad outcome other than maybe a little bit of wasted money, but not much. But it saves you a lot of grief and work down the line, because if you end up, this is what happens. We overdo it on the front end. So we plant too much, we grow too much, we buy too much because our eyes are bigger than our stomach. So we went to the garden store and we load up our car and we get home, and we never had a plan for where all of this was going to fit in our garden. But we feel like, gosh, I just bought all this, I got to make it work. And then we either pack it in or we put it maybe where it's not the ideal conditions. But no matter what the issue, those plants are not probably in the ideal condition, or they're not getting enough sunlight and air circulation because it's too crowded. Or the other alternative is you've got enough room, but you bought a lot of plants and you plant them all. Next thing you know, they're very happy and they're growing and growing and growing. And now it's like, oh my gosh, I got to take care of all of this stuff. And I got to prune back the diseased foliage, and I've got to weed underneath there or apply more mulch. Anyway, I always say start out small. You can always add, but it's hard to subtract in the garden. And I don't want people to get so overwhelmed in their early years, or especially their first year, that they just get burned out and it leaves a bad taste in their mouth. Because even with just doing a few things right, it's amazing how successful your garden will be. And I don't want it to be so successful that you view it as more of a burden than a benefit.
Totally. I think particularly with all of the homesteading content that we see now, with all of the amazing epic gardens that we see, it's hard to just do a couple of pots of something when your Pinterest looks like growing all your food, I think too, when it comes to garden planning, the beauty is every year you get the chance to plan another garden, right? With the seasonality of things. So every year you get to try a different type of seed. Every year you get to try a different species of tomato, But also, in order to do that, it's recommended for that first year to start smaller, because then in a year you have a lifetime of gardens, really.
Yes, you've learned every year. And here's the other thing, whatever mistakes you made, and I always call them learning opportunities, because you should be learning from anything that doesn't have the outcome that you had hoped it had had. And you say, well, what happened here? And then you try to figure it out so that next year, as you just said, you get a do-over. And now you can maybe expand. But that's so important. And there was something else that you made me think of, and now I can't think of it, but that alone is a good point.
Yeah, we can come back to it.
Yeah.
We're talking a lot about plants and seeds. What about soil? Because our soil is now at the end of, last season, our plants pulled the nutrients out of the soil. So, what does it look like to plan for your soil as well as your plants?
Great question. Soil is probably the most important thing that you can do in your garden. I always tell people, if you had $1 to spend on your garden, put 90 cents of it into the soil and then 10 cents on whatever else you need, because soil is everything. Soil is what anchors your plant in place. And really, that's the main reason for the soil, because if we think about how important is it for the plant? Well, the plant can grow in a hydroponic or an aquaponic situation where it's not even in soil, as long as it's getting the nutrients. But in a typical garden setting, it's in the ground or it's in a raised bed or a grow bag or a container. And so the soil is doing several important jobs, anchoring your plant in place and keeping it from blowing away. But more than that, it's housing all the life in the soil food web, that living network of organisms, organic material that is blended into the sand, silt, and clay, which is the typical definition of soil, along with air and water, to create the perfect ecosystem for the roots to thrive and for the fungi and the bacteria to break down the organisms in the soil to convert it to nutrients that the roots can take up. So if we're not focusing on that as we should be, and we're just thinking, well, when my plants need nutrients, I'm just going to hit them with fertilizer, because your soil is kind of lifeless. Maybe you started off with some crappy soil, and the only way they can get the nutrients, because you didn't focus on the soil, is by fertilizing. But when you do it that way, yeah, the fertilizer works great and the roots take it up and the plant grows a lot, but the fertilizer doesn't stick around. It's taken up or it goes out the bottom. And then what is there? I mean, the plants, they want an even feeding. It's like, we don't want to binge eat and then we don't eat again for a month or 2 weeks or whatever. We want just, breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day would be good. Not that you have to fertilize like that, but if your soil is prepared in a way that has a lot of organic material in it, whether it's compost or aged poultry manure or, mushroom compost, just a nice blend of organic natural material, that is always happening, because the fungi and the bacteria and the other living organisms are breaking all of that stuff down and pooping it out and converting it into a form of nutrients that the plants are able to take up as they need it. And that only happens in healthy living soil.
So how do I help improve my soil every year if I'm also wanting to improve my garden every year?
Yeah. The way you do it is you just refresh the soil. Soil does not go bad. So even if it's in a container or a grow bag, it doesn't go bad. But in a smaller environment, as a container or grow bag, you might want to either dump it out and then add some compost to it, source some really high quality compost in wherever you live, and blend in a third of that, maybe take out a third of the existing soil and put in a third, and the third you took out, you can add to your garden beds or somewhere else. But now you're putting back some good organic nutrients and soil structure that the plants are going to need as well. But for me now, in my raised beds, and for years, what I've done is, once I got my garden soil really cooking, really doing well, I didn't have to do any major enhancements from year after year after that. I would just top dress, which is just spreading an inch or two of compost over the surface and then lightly working it in or forking it in and letting it just work its way down into the soil through the light disturbance that I would do, and then let the microorganisms and the earthworms and all those other living organisms draw it down through the activity that they're doing in the soil. And that's it. The other thing, Maria, is plan ahead for some mulch, and put some mulch, which is just broken down. Maybe it's fine wood chips, or maybe it's straw, kind of semi-rotted straw, or shredded leaves, or something on the surface that protects the soil. But because you're using a natural material on the surface, it's going to break down too. And that automatically is going to help to improve your soil as well. But back to my point about the thing I said I forgot, was planning ahead on where you're going to put your plants is not only important for the year that you're putting them in that garden, but for subsequent years too, because there are organisms in the soil that are called pathogens, and pathogens are the things that are diseases that impact certain plants living there. So if you planted tomatoes in your let's say you have 2 raised beds, and you planted tomatoes in one year and you had a great output. And so you put them back in that bed the next year and it was good that year. But in the third year, you started to notice your tomatoes weren't doing as well. And you just chalked it off to a bad year. And the fourth year, you find it's your worst year ever. Well, what's probably happened is there are pathogens building up in that soil of that first bed. And you keep putting what they need to survive back in that bed every
Mm.
season. So the pathogens don't die off. They're getting fed and nourished every season, but your plants are suffering and getting diseases from those pathogens. So to my point, by knowing that you need to move those plants in the next year, that will prevent you from making that mistake of keep putting them back in the same place. So you need to not just think about this year, but make note of what you did this year so that next year you move those plants around and you can starve off those pathogens that are kind of hungrily waiting for those tomato plants to come back into that spot. But you denied them that opportunity by rotating them out. So it goes beyond just the first year, but I don't want to overcomplicate it. It's not complicated, but it just shows, it speaks to the importance of planning ahead, not just for the immediate season, but for, seasons in the future too.
What does your like physical planning look like? So do you have a garden planner or a notebook? Like, are you drawing out the outline of all your raised beds year to year and then saying, okay, this year I'm sketching out tomatoes in it. This year I'm sketching out this. What does the actual planning look like for you?
Well, at this point, I have 16 raised beds, so I'm able to move my families of plants around. And so I make note every year of what I planted where. And before I plant in the subsequent year, and actually going back 3 years, I'm looking at 4 years of history as I plan where
In a
the next.
notebook, in a Google Doc? What does it look like?
Yeah, basically a spreadsheet.
A spreadsheet.
Yeah. But a notebook works too. It just depends on what works for you. As long as you have something and you refer to it, that's all that really matters. And that's how I know what went where before, so I can avoid putting it back in that spot if I need to rotate it around a little bit longer before it goes back to that original spot, which is okay to do as long as you give it some time, a few years between seasons. So that really speaks to planning. And that's, multi-level planning, but that's every bit as important for a healthy garden.
Yeah, totally. Totally. I love that. What about types of plants? We hear a lot about pollinators. We hear a lot about natives. We hear perennials, no more annuals, no more this, no more that. So when it comes to plant selection, this is the time that we have to really pick the plants before we put them in the ground. So what do you suggest with that?
Well, I would say my best gardens, health wise, as far as an ecosystem or a healthy habitat, have been the ones that I have really focused on adding flowers to my vegetable garden and incorporating plants and flowering plants that produce pollen and nectar that are going to bring in not only, butterflies and bees and different beneficial insects, but predatory insects are going to go after my pest insects. And then the birds are going to come in. And it's just such a naturally healthy garden that as an organic gardener, the last thing I want to do and I won't do is spray up, a harmful pesticide or insecticide because I know the underlying consequences or the unintended consequences or the ripple effect, the collateral damage of using
Mm-hmm.
something to kill something. Well, it doesn't just kill one thing when you're applying a insecticide. It kills a lot of things. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to be the guy that kills the insect that the bird comes along and eats because the insect was dead because of poisoning and then it affects the bird. And that's so avoidable. But the best way to do that is to think, well, what can I plan and bring into my garden that benefits whether I'm a vegetable gardener or a flower gardener? What can I do with different flower shapes and sizes and forms that attract a lot of different types of insects? Because all insects feed off the same type of flowers. They have different mouth parts and different ways that they access pollen and nectar. And so therefore, the diversity in your garden of the sources that they need will really draw them in. They'll find it. And that's how you have the most vibrant, diverse, or biodiverse garden ever. And the healthiest one too, because everything you need is there.
Yeah, like biodiversity in the soil when it comes to all of the different things in the soil that make it a happy, healthy living thing. And then this biodiversity of plants to support all of the pollinators. I'm a hummingbird lady. So I had like a pink and red garden in one side of my house because I was like, this is just for my hummingbirds.
Yes.
How do you recommend going in and selecting a biodiverse? Like, what does a biodiverse garden mean to you? And how would I go and select that? Like, how would I ensure that my garden is biodiverse?
Well, so what we're trying to do is bring in beneficial insects and pollinators. And thankfully now, I mean, you've got to consider the source of the information, but there's no shortage of information online. But if you Googled top 10 beneficial flowering plants to for pest control, and then it might ask you, what's your zip code or something like that. It'll give you those lists. That thankfully there are a lot of list options out there, and all you have to do is feed it the subject line. And if you have access to an AI program or something like that, all the better, because it can get very specific for you. And because it's very regional sometimes as to, what plants work best depending on where you live. Like Maria, now that you're down there in Florida, what you would grow would be significantly different than probably even what I would grow, not that far from you, but imagine somebody much further north, their palate is going to be much different. So that's where relying on an authoritative source for that information. So be sure if you looked for that sort of list, you're looking at where does that list come from? Like, is it the xersey-society.org, which would be amazing. That's a very reliable source, or the Missouri Botanical Garden, or, you know, uh, National Wildlife Foundation. It's just, those trusted, time-tested resources are working on our behalf to provide that information for us. Wildflower Ladybird Wildflower Garden, I think they have a huge resource base and they provide those kind of lists. So it's out there.
You mentioned botanical gardens, also going to the local botanical garden. So many of our botanical gardens have pollinator sections, like they have dedicated sections of their garden just to beneficials and all of that. So that's a great idea. Totally. And then also something that I'm learning personally in this first year in Florida, I'm trying to go to the local garden centers that are owned and operated by a family or a person. So not the big box stores. And I'm just like walking around. I'm buying stuff, but like, I'm not even, my local garden center, shout out to Giverny Gardens in Jupiter, Florida. But they have these little signs throughout the whole garden center that has little icons of this feeds the hummingbirds, this feeds the butterflies, this feeds the bees. And for me, someone who is walking through this garden center, I don't recognize one plant because it's like I'm in a completely different country compared to where I was living. It's been so helpful because I've been able to shop based off of those specific pollinators.
Really, really good point. A few things there I want to make note of. Everyone listening to this that likes the direction of this conversation should find that place wherever you are. For me, it's the Chattahoochee Nature Center near me that specializes in growing out native plants of all types. And it's just the best place that I can go, other than the State Botanical Garden in Georgia in Athens, where the UGA is. That's another huge campus of beautiful real-time native plants doing what they do all through the year. But to your point, like you said, you just go all the time and walk around and see what's blooming and all of that. The best thing you can do is locate those sources where you live and then make a point right on your calendar. If you could go once a month throughout the year and see how these plants are looking, what they're doing, what is being attracted to them. And usually there's backup information at that facility where there's either pamphlets, or you can take your phone by that tag that's by the plant or whatever and learn a lot more about it. But for your area, there's nothing better. A list online isn't going to be as good as actually seeing what that plant looks like. What's the growing habit? How big does it get? How wide does it get? And how does it serve your biodiverse aspirations in your garden?
Yeah. And talking to the people. But how does this work in
Yeah.
your garden? Local garden
Yes.
societies too.
And a
What
lot of
about
them, Maria, have volunteers that work in those facilities because they love plants so much, or they love the native plants, and they just want to talk about them. So they'll be out there and they'll have their tag on or something, and you'll ask them a question and they just tee off. And so
and they won't let you go. They'll talk with
don't
you for
miss that
2 hours about
opportunity.
their plants. It's amazing.
It's gold. It's gold. Don't miss it.
It's amazing. What about like planting your plants based off of, is it called like a trap crop, or like putting plants that repel bad bugs for tomatoes next to that. Can you talk about that planting system as well? Because that definitely requires some planning.
Yeah. So companion planting is kind of the general term to what you've just described. And the idea is that by putting a plant near your cash crop, let's just call it that because we know that's whether it's a flower or edible that we want to protect, putting a plant near that either attracts, repel, or confuses a pest insect is the theory behind companion planting. And there are plants that will either attract insects away from your cash plant to them, that's a trap crop, or one that has such a strong scent, maybe it's an herb or marigold or something like that, that puts out such a strong scent, it kind of hides the cash crop. The problem with this is there are books that have been written about companion planting that use a lot of anecdotal examples, and there's really not a lot of science behind it. And thankfully, a couple years ago, Jessica Walliser wrote a book on science-based companion planting. And she gave specific examples based on scientific studies that showed how this plant does this and how you can use it in your garden to protect this plant. It was a much higher level resource that you could look to that went beyond anecdotal examples. That is my kind of source.
Yeah, the old wives' tales that like my grandma knows.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but where's the science?
And what about with planting location of plants? Obviously, if we're talking about biodiversity, your 16 beds, what does that look like? Are you putting all of your tomatoes in a certain amount of beds? Are you companion planting? Like, how would you suggest people plan the plant spacing and the plant arrangements within their beds as well?
Good question. I do some companion planting, but I tend to keep the same crops close together. But that said, companion planting for insect control or pollination would suggest that you find space in that same area where you're planting like plants to include some different flowers and different things to just break up that monocrop area. So I do that. I could do it better, but because of the strategy that I do, which is my entire inner perimeter of my garden is flowers. So I kind of have a border inside my fence line that is dedicated to a lot of different flowers. And then within each bed, I do plant flowers. They're just not in the heart of the bed. They're on like the corners and on the edges. And then in the middle is where the workers are growing. But by that strategy has worked really well. But it is a good idea to carry your flowers into your beds where you're growing your edibles, because the closer you can get those flowers to your edibles, the better off your edibles are going to be and the more activity you're going to see of the beneficial insects that are protecting those plants.
What's your favorite flower? What flowers do you like to grow every year?
Oh man, they're not the prettiest flowers, but they are definitely flowers that attract a lot of wildlife. Like borage is one that is very pretty, but it's very promiscuous and it super self seeds. And next thing you know, the next season, if you just plant that beautiful purplish flower in the summertime, it gets of nice size, but it is a bee magnet. I don't know of a plant that attracts more bees.
Forage is one of my favorite herbs.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
I make borage tea, iced borage tea all summer. I drink it.
Wow.
Yeah, you boil it, like you boil the borage in water and then you let it cool and it tastes like cucumber water. It's unbelievable. And from
Oh,
a medicinal standpoint, it's
yeah.
like very therapeutic. It's good for like managing anxiety and stuff.
Good to know. And I like
I
cucumber
love
water too, so that's great to know because I don't often grow cucumbers, so but I grow a lot of borage. But you have
so
to be careful with that. But I also like letting herbs go to flower, like fennel and dill and basil, because not only do you get the benefit of the herbs, but you get the flowers that are very attractive to different types of insects. And those are good examples of umbral flowers, like with the fennel and the dill. They have like a dinner plate bloom style. And that is really a good flower to attract in like hoverflies, some very beneficial insects that can only access their nectar or pollen through certain plant types. And that would be a good example of that. And they could be the host plants for swallowtail butterflies with like the
mm.
dental and like dental. What is dental? Fennel and dill. Somebody should cross pollinate those so we have dental, and then
That
I
we
can
have dental. Yeah.
validate myself. But yeah, so anyway, my point is that those insects need different types of sources for their nectar and pollen, and they can only get it in certain ways. And by our making that easier for them by specifically making plant choices that accommodate them, that just makes the garden come to life even more. And I got to tell you, there's nothing better than seeing your garden come to life because of the effort you put into it by bringing in new types of plants that attract the wildlife. And I didn't always do that until a few years ago when we started dedicating specific space in the garden for those flowers and so forth and into the beds. And it was night and day difference from the year prior to when we hadn't really done that to the year we focused on it. It was dramatically different in every way, including the health of my
Really?
garden. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, incredible.
In terms of this year, do you have new plans for your garden? Are you kind of rinse repeating what you did last year, or are you doing some new stuff this year? What can we look forward to seeing on Joe Gardner?
Well, you can look forward to seeing some new native plants that I've started last year and the year before that never really got planted. So
Okay.
to I in here again, I've been so busy with the seed starting. I know that I've got a lot of plants in my nursery area that have been growing up and getting ready, and they'll come out of dormancy soon. And that's when I'll walk back out there and I'll go, "Oh, great. Now I can get you into the garden." But specifically, have I planned out and written down exactly which ones are coming in? No, I haven't. So do as I say, not as I do sometimes. But as I said, I'm always aspiring to be a better planner than a planter.
Well, when it comes to doing as you say, no one says it better than Joe Lample. And your organic vegetable gardening program is open, I believe, only this week for enrollment at a really steep discount. I'm a graduate. Tell us about organic vegetable gardening. And if you want this to be the best garden of 2025, what people can expect in that course.
Okay. Thank you for that question. And I would say it this way. My first television series that I ever hosted was a while back, but it was the best concept for a gardening show ever, and it's never been replicated. But the concept, it was fresh from the garden on DIY Network, and I was the host. And in every episode, my job was to teach people how to grow food all the way through the process from start to finish, basically from planting the seed to the harvest time. And every episode focused on only one crop. So by the time you watch the whole show, you saw the whole process of how that plant grew from seed to harvest with me taking you through the steps. So every show took like 4 months to film because we're doing the whole documentation of the whole process. And it was such a popular series. People loved it. It was a great idea, but it eventually retired because we ran out of things to teach people how to grow. Literally, that's why the show ended, only because we didn't have anything new to grow. But ever since then, I always wanted to replicate that series. But if and when I did, I wanted to do it from my garden rather than a set garden and do it all organically, because back then we weren't doing it all organically. It wasn't my choice, but we weren't. But this time I'd want to teach people how to do that organically. And the format would be, imagine being by my side, letting me be your teacher or your guide, showing you through the process of every, let's say, the most popular warm and cool season vegetables that you can grow. And I'm taking you and showing you from the time you put the seed in the ground or the seedling in the ground, and we're growing it out together. We're like partners in the garden for the whole season. And then we're videoing it or filming it so that we can always go back and reference it. Well, that's what we ended up doing. So the course, Organic Vegetable Gardening, is that manifestation of the desire to create that sort of experience. And so in 3 years recently, we took the time to film all of that material. It's a lot.
Insane. There's a reason why it's never been replicated. There's a reason why no one else has done it.
That is exactly right. It's a very long process to document that. It would take a lot of money if you were a big TV crew, and we, found some way to save some money there. But holy smokes, honestly, I was exhausted when we finally finished that course. And we're still not finished because we continue to update and add new crops to the resume, which is great. But anyway, if somebody is serious about really wanting to up their game with their food growing, and I believe now more than ever, I mean, we're seeing food prices go up like crazy. The agricultural industry is in flux. We don't know what kind of access we're going to have to food in the very near future. So I believe that everyone should take the time to learn how to grow their own food, and ideally learn how to grow it organically. And if that resonates with anybody listening, then the organic vegetable gardening course is the course. I'm telling you, Maria, there's nothing else in the universe that is like this, and it's packed with information.
Oh, I can attest to it. I've seen all the courses because I think when you go on YouTube a lot, you see only that one glimpse in time of whatever, planting
Right,
up sunflowers,
right.
planting up tomatoes, but you don't say, okay, but what is this going to look like in the pot when it's fully grown? Like you don't have that scope. You just get this flash and then you have to learn in real time, you know? So your course gives people a leg up because they almost get a glimpse into the future in a different way.
Well, and they see it, they can sit and watch the average video length is maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes, but they see in that short period of time how I started the seed or seedling in the ground and the harvesting of that same plant that they saw me put in the ground a few minutes later. And here's the other thing that makes this course so unique is that even if all we offered, which is a lot of, is me teaching you, like you're right next to me, how to grow all that stuff, but we offer real-time access by the ability for you to ask me questions. If you're a student in the course, you have that access to me. You can send me an email or work in the course forum and shoot me a message, or a community online. And we do office hours too. So it's just like ongoing. It never ends and it only gets better. So I can't think of anything like it. And our students love it.
I still get my emails. I took
Yeah.
Master Seed Starting a couple years ago, and I still get my emails about the Master Seed Starting office hours this week. And I'm like, oh yeah, maybe I'll go say hi to Joe.
Lifetime access. And that's the
Yeah.
other thing. You enroll in the course, you pay a nominal tuition, and it's amazing because imagine buying a car and paying your price. And then, 4 years later, they say, Maria, you've got 40,000 miles on that car. And we have, a brand new model that we're going to exchange out for you for free. You don't have to pay us anything, but we're going to give you that upgraded new car. Enjoy it. And you're like, what? Well, that's maybe a really amplified exaggeration, but the point is you get a lot of value right when you enroll, but it only gets better because it gets richer and deeper, and we're never coming back to you for a renewal fee or anything like that. So people love that.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And even now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, wow, maybe I retake it now that I'm in zone 10B because I took it through the lens of me being in zone 5B, so
And
maybe
you can.
I'm probably going to focus on different things this time around than I focused on in the beginning. So,
And you log back in and you just
and it's
start
all
over
right there,
wherever you want
baby.
to go, and you got the access. So do it.
Yeah. Amazing. So, and for the week, it's $297, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So tell us how we can find, I'm going to put the link in the show notes, but what do people need to know to go and grab the course before the price goes up?
Yes. Thanks for saying that, because that is really an important point. And I don't know if that may sound like a lot of money, but the truth is that course retails for $797. And every time we've ever offered it at the lowest special we've ever offered was $397.
Mm-hmm.
And this launch, we've decided, based on the current state of affairs, we really want to make this as accessible as possible and not lose money. So
Yeah.
it's $297, and that's a steal for once you realize how much is included for that. But
Yeah.
it's joegardner.com/OVG, I think.
Yeah. And I have a link for people
Okay,
that I'll put in
good.
the show notes. And so when does that price go away?
After the 31st.
Okay, after the 31st. So you have until the 31st to grab it at that cost. It'll be linked in the show notes. Grab it, plant friends. I mean, I don't know if I can give it more of an endorsement than I've taken it multiple times and constantly reference it when I'm gardening.
Good, Maria. I'm glad you said that. We're really proud of it, and our students love it, and they're just blown away by it when they get in there.
Yeah, so good. Well, my friend, it's so wonderful to catch up with you. And until next year, when I have you back this time around.
Yeah, well, hopefully it won't be that long, but it's always something I look forward to whenever that happens.
Maybe a fall episode we have coming.
Why not? Let's do it.
For sure. All right. Thank you so much, Joe. Honestly, this conversation made me a little sad because I'm leaving my growing season and I feel like everybody else is going into their growing season, but I'm excited to live vicariously through all of you. If you are looking for a high quality educational resource for organic vegetable gardening, I cannot recommend Joe's course enough. I have taken it. I've taken all of his courses. I'm a friend and a student of his, and he has that incredible discount. So there's a link in the show notes that will take you right to the discount. You can click it. Definitely go get it. And like he said, there's lifetime access, and I've returned to the course many times. So I hope this episode was helpful. I hope you are so excited to get into your garden as the countdown continues. And until next time, my sweet plant friends, I hope you keep growing joy. Plant friend, thank you for tuning in today. It means so much to me that I get to be part of your planty journey. If you like what you heard, make sure you're subscribed to the show so you never miss an episode. We have so many incredible interviews and solo episodes on incredible houseplant and gardening topics that you will not want to miss this year. And while you're over there in the podcast player subscribing, why don't you click over to the review section of Growing Joy with Plants and leave us a review. Reviews are tremendously helpful for the growth of the podcast, so thanks in advance. If you're looking for more opportunities to grow as a plant parent with Growing Joy content, we've got so many options for you. First, I highly recommend you taking the Plant Parent Personality Test. It's free, it's super fun, it takes 3 minutes to complete. At the end of the test, you're gonna get your plant parent personality profile and a curated list of plants, projects, and podcast episodes that are right up your alley, tailored just for you and your lifestyle, inspired by your results. The links are in the show notes. If you're looking to uplevel your plant parent game, I have so many free downloads on my website that I think could help you, like the Understanding Natural Light download or 9 different ways to green up your office space. If you'd like to support the show monetarily and help me bring the show to as many people as possible for free, you can head to our Patreon link in the show notes to learn more about our offerings. And finally, I invite you to come hang out with me and continue the planty conversation on social media on Instagram and TikTok. I'm Growing Joy with Maria. My DMs are always open if you have requests for topics or ideas for the show. Thank you again for listening. It is truly my honor and delight to help you keep blooming and keep growing joy.